Hey guys, this is Subhashish Mishra. Today we will discuss top 25 manual API testing interview questions. Please watch the complete video. I have explained everything in detail. Still, if you have any doubt, please let me know in the comment section. I will respond to your query. One more thing, if you are very new to my channel and watching my video for the very first time, please go through the channel. I have created lot of software testing interview related videos. I will provide those video links in the description. Please watch it. If you like it, please press the like button, share it with your friends and subscribe to my channel. So without any delay, let's start. So the very first question is, what is an API? You know, API stands for Application Programming Interface. It is a set of routines, protocols and tools for building software applications. API acts as an interface between two software applications and allows the two software applications to communicate with each other. API is a collection of software functions that can be executed by another software program. Here you are seeing same in this diagram, right? This is the API, this is your client machine, this is your server. Okay, we are communicating through the API. Okay, we will move to the next question. What is API testing? So in our previous question, we understood what is an API. So I already told you, right? API acts as an interface between two software applications and allows the two software applications to communicate with each other. API is a collection of software functions that can be executed by another software program. So testing of these software functions is known as software testing. In API testing, we mainly focus on business logic layer of the software architecture. The purpose of API testing is to check the functionality, reliability, performance and security of the programming interface. Since APIs do not have a GUI, API testing is performed at the message layer of the system. So that is all about your API testing. We will move to the next question. What are the different types of API testing? So you know, we have different types of API testing like functional testing, integration testing, unit testing, load testing, security testing, usability testing, force testing. What is functional testing? It examines an API's endpoint and actions to ensure they work as intended. Input parameters, outputs, expected behaviors and numerous API calls are tested through functional testing. What is integration testing? The main goal of integration testing is to examine how various APIs or different parts interact. It makes API communicate and share data correctly. What is unit testing? It involves individually testing each function, each method or each API component. It ensures that each piece of the code works as intended and adheres to the standard. What is your load testing? Through load testing, an API's performance is assessed under various load scenarios. Many concurrent queries are simulated to evaluate the API's response time. So basically, we check the performance of the API, the scalability of the API. Then security testing. It involves validating the API for security vulnerabilities and ensuring it meets security standards. Usability testing. It evaluates the user friendliness and simplicity of the API. It emphasizes elements like API documentation, simplicity of integration, readability of error messages and general developer experience. Force testing. Force testing is mainly performed by feeding unexpected and invalid inputs into the API to test its ability to handle unexpected input and recover from the errors. Mainly through fast testing, we check if API is handled with proper error code and messages. So that's your fast testing. So these are the different types of API testing we do. We'll move to the next question. Which protocols are testable with API testing? So we have HTTP, we have HTTPS, we have REST, SOAP, GraphQL, JMS, UDDI. So all these protocols are testable with API testing. So the full form I have given it here, you can read it. Okay, we'll move to the next question. How API testing is different from unit testing? Very, very important. So unit testing is performed by the dev team, whereas API testing is performed by QA team. We all know, right? Unit testing is always performed by the development team. So unit testing is performed before build given to the QA team. As unit testing is performed by the developers, it is done beforehand, before handed over to QA. API testing is performed after the build is ready for testing. Once the build is available in the QA environment, we do API testing. A developer can access the source code, and source code is involved in unit testing. QA has no access to the source code, and source code is not involved in API testing. Basic functionalities are tested in unit testing. All the functionalities are tested part of API testing. Testing scope is limited in unit testing. Testing scope is broader in API testing. Unit testing is part of white box testing. API testing is part of black box testing. So these are the difference between your API testing and unit testing. We'll move to the next question. What are the benefits of API testing? Very, very important. So there are n number of benefits in your API testing, like test for the core functionality, earlier testing, faster and better test coverage, reduce cost and risk, faster time to resolution, quick automation. Let's understand point by point. Test for core functionalities. So the first major advantage of API testing is access to the application without an user interface or UI. So testing the core or code level functionality of the application provides an early evaluation of its overall build strength before running the GUI. This helps expose the small errors that can become a large problem during the GUI testing. Okay? So in that way, we check all the core functionalities in API testing. Earlier testing. In API testing, once the logic is designed, test can be built to validate the correctness in response and data. So we don't have to wait for various items to finish their work or for the full application to be built. Test cases are isolated and ready to build immediately. So that's how we can perform earlier testing. Faster and better test coverage. API testing is time effective when compared to GUI testing. API test automation requires less code, so it can provide faster and better test coverage. Reduce cost and risk. API testing helps us to reduce the testing cost. With API testing, we can find minor bugs before GUI testing. These minor bugs can be very big during GUI testing. So finding those bugs in the early stage during API testing will be cost effective to the company and reduce risk as well. Faster time to resolution. So when API tests fail, we know exactly where our system broke and where the defect can be found. This helps reduce time triaging bugs between builds, integrations and even different team members. Quick automation. API test automation requires less code than GUI automation test. So that's provide faster test result and better test coverage in less time. These are the benefits of your API testing. We'll move to the next question. What are the common tests performed on APIs? Validate API response is based on the input given on the request body. All the expected fields should be displayed in the response. We verify the status code. error messages in case of negative scenarios. We verify the database if it is updated properly based on the API functionality. We verify if API needs to trigger some other events or needs to call another API. We verify how the API is authenticated, if authentication mechanism is working fine for this API. We verify the response time. What is the response time? What is the performance of the API? When we are triggering, when you are making a post call, what is the response time? That we validate. So, these are few common tests performed on the APIs. We will move to the next question. What are the main challenges faced in API testing? Very, very important question. So, understanding the API and providing input values in the request body is a difficult job as UI is not available. Selecting proper parameters and its combinations is a big challenge in API testing. Proper sequencing of call is required as this may lead to inadequate coverage in testing. Response validation when it is too big. API documentation. API documentation is a very big challenge. If API documentation is not updated properly, testing the API is very, very difficult. Access to the DB. If we don't have proper access, if we cannot access the DB, then how you will validate the functionality? Okay, so these are the challenges we do face in API testing. We will move to the next question. Name some most commonly used HTTP methods. So, you know we have different HTTP methods like GET, POST, PUT, DELETE, patch, options, head. So, GET is basically used to retrieve data from a server. POST is used to add data to an existing file or resource in a server. So, basically POST means add or create. Then we have PUT. PUT is used to update an existing file or resource in a server. So, POST is create, PUT is update or edit. Then we have DELETE, used to delete from a data from a server. So, using delete method we can delete data from a server. Then we have patch. So, using patch method you can partially update a resource. Very, very important question people ask, what is the difference between PUT and patch? In PUT you can update the complete payload. Okay, you can update everything, but in the patch you can update a very specific thing. Okay, so that's why we call it partial update of a resource. Then we have options, used to describe the communication options for the target resource. Then we have head, it asks for response which is identical to GET request but without the response body. Let's move to the next question. Name some tools used for API testing. Very easy question. So, we use Postman, we use Advanced REST Client, SOAP UI, we use REST Assured is mainly used for automation, JMeter is used for performance, then Catalan Studio, curl command. So, using all these things you can do API testing. Then we will move to the next question. What is API versioning and why it is important in API testing? So, API versioning is the practice of managing changes to an API and ensuring that these changes are made without disrupting clients. A good API versioning strategy clearly communicates the changes made and allow API customers to decide when to upgrade to the latest version at their own pace. API versioning is important in API testing to ensure that the correct version of the API is being tested and that changes in the API do not break existing client applications. We will move to the next question. How is API testing performed? Very basic question, right? So, we have different phases, right? So, we start with test planning and preparation, then test environment setup, then test case design, then test execution, response validations. So, these are the different phases how we perform API testing. So, in our test planning or preparation phase, what we do? During planning phase, we can identify the API standards, specifications and the exact behavior. We will decide on the testing parameters and the test goals. We will design the test scenarios and gather the required test information. Then we have test environment setup. So, environment setup is very important and should be done before test execution. We can create the test environment by establishing the API endpoints, test servers, dummy servers and any necessary test databases or external dependencies. Then we have test case design. So, we need to understand the requirement or functionality of the API and we need to develop the test cases using different test case design methodology like equivalent partition, boundary value analysis, error handling, adding positive and negative test cases. Okay. So, for each test case we should have proper inputs, API call details and whatever the expected result, that should be handy. Then we have test execution. So, we need to execute all the test cases against the API and we need to capture the test result. We need to make sure that all test cases are passed. In case of failures, we need to raise defects and also we need to make sure that defect is fixed and we do a retest. Then we have response validation. Explicitly I have added because in our API testing we should explicitly validate the response. So, we need to validate the response and we need to make sure it has all the expected values. For different type of payload or inputs, different kind of response is expected. So, we need to make sure all expected fields are present in the response. Okay, we will move to the next question. What types of bugs does API testing uncover? Incorrect or unexpected API responses, inconsistent or invalid data formats like JSON or XML, missing or incorrect error handling and error messages, authentication or authorization issues, API endpoint or parameter validation failures, poor performance or scalability under different load. We can check the API response time. Okay. Then inadequate handling of edge cases or boundary conditions, incompatibility or incorrect behavior with different API versions. API versioning is very important here. Integration issues with third party APIs or systems, security vulnerabilities such as injection attacks or improper access controls. We will move to the next question. What are the different status code and how they are used? So, we have different series of status code, for example 200 series, 400 series, 500 series. Okay. So, for 200 the very popular one 200 OK, then 201 created, 202 accepted. So, 200 OK means the request is OK. In case of your get method, in case of your put method, you can get this 200 OK. Then 201 created, it means the request is complete and a new resource is created. Basically the post method, here we can expect 201, then 202 accepted, the request is accepted for processing, but the processing is not complete. Then we have 400 bad request. Basically the server did not understand the request. We will get some validation message, that is your 400 bad request. 401 unauthorized means the request page needs a username and password, basically the access. Okay. Then 403 forbidden, access is forbidden to this requested page, in that case we will get 403. 404 not found, the server cannot find the requested page. Then we have a 500 internal server error, the request was not completed, the server met an unexpected condition, in that case we get 500. Mostly for the QA we will have, means if we are getting 500 means there is some issue or there is some defect. Okay. If we will investigate further, we will get 500 internal server. Then 501 not implemented, if something is not implemented and we are trying to test that, we will get 501. Something means if some features are not implemented and we are trying to do that. Okay. Then 502 bad gateway, the request was not completed, the server received an invalid response from the upstream server. Then we have 503 service unavailable, means the request was not completed, the server is temporarily down. So, in that case we can expect 503. Then 504 gateway timeout, it means the server is taking lot of time to give the response, in that case we will get 504 gateway timeout. Okay. So, these are the different status code. Okay. We will move to the next question. What is the difference between SOAP and REST? Very important question. Okay. So, what is SOAP? SOAP stands for Simple Object Access Protocol and REST stands for Representational State Transfer. SOAP is a protocol through which two computers communicate by sharing XML document, whereas REST is a service architecture and design for network based software architecture. SOAP supports only XML format, whereas REST supports different data formats. SOAP does not support caching, REST support caching, and SOAP is slower than REST, REST is faster than SOAP. REST data can be cacheable, as we can mark REST data as cacheable or not. That means we can access REST data faster from the cache without sending another API call. That is why caching is straightforward and easier in REST, and REST is also faster, but SOAP does not support caching and SOAP is slower than REST. We will move to the next question. What is the latency in API testing? So, API latency is the total time the API system takes to respond to API calls. Latency refers to the response time or the delay taken by the request to reach the server. We need to ensure that latency involved in reaching the server should be minimum, because as higher is the latency, greater is the impact in the application's speed and performance. So, that is all about your latency. We will move to the next question. What is API documentation? Very important question. API documentation is a technical content that describes the API in detail. It includes instructions on how to effectively use and integrate the API with an emphasis on any security constraints. It also provides updates with regards to the API's lifecycle, such as new versions or impeding retirement. API documentation is very important because that is the document which end users refer to use an API. So, this document should be very neat and clean and should contain everything in detail. Okay. So, API documentation is very important. We will move to the next question. What is an API endpoint? An API endpoint refers to a specific URL or URI. URI means Uniform Resource Identifier, which represents a unique resource or service provided by an API. It acts as a point of interaction for clients to send requests and receive responses from an API. So, we all know APIs operate through request and responses. When an API requests to access data from a web application or server, a response is always sent back. The location where the API sends a request and where the response sent back is known as endpoint. So, here you can see the example. Okay. This is one of the example of API endpoint. We will move to the next question. What are the some common authentication methods used in API testing? So, we have token based authentication, we have basic authentication, we have OAuth authentication. So, in our token based authentication, it involves issuing a token to the client after successful authentication, which is then included in a subsequent API request for authorization. In basic authentication, it involves sending the username and password as part of the API request header, which is encoded in base 64 format. OAuth, that is very widely used authentication framework that allows for the delegation of access rights from one entity to another without sharing credentials. We will move to the next question. What is query parameter in API testing? So, query parameter in API testing are used to pass additional parameters in the URL of an API request. These parameters are used to customize the behavior of the API request, such as filtering, sorting or paginating results. So, here you can see I have given one example page equal to 2, this is the query parameter, right. So, basically here this is helping in the paginating the result. So, these query parameters can be defined as the optional key value pair which appears after the question mark. Here you see, right, after the question mark, this is the query parameter. These are like always appended to the end of the URL using a question mark. Okay. So, that is your query parameter. We will move to the next question. What is the purpose of the request and response headers in API testing? So, request and response headers in API testing are used to transmit additional information about the request or response. Request headers can be used to specify a content type, authentication, caching, language preference and so on, right. So, what is this content type? Content type like specifies the type of data being sent to the server in the request body. Also, we pass accept as header. What is accept? So, that tells the API server which format you expect to receive back, like you expect JSON or you expect XML, right. Then you have authentication, which type of authentication you want to give for your API. Okay. Cache control also, like that specifies whether and how a response should be cached. Similarly, we have also different headers in the response. Response headers can provide information about the server, caching and many more. We will move to the next question. How do you handle dynamic values in API testing such as timestamps or random data? So, dynamic values in API testing such as timestamps or random data can be handled by using techniques such as data driven testing, parameterization or test data management. We will move to the next question. What is API mocking and why it is used in API testing? So, API mocking is the action of simulating or imitating actual APIs by answering fake realistic responses to requests. It replaces APIs you cannot currently use because they are unavailable, down or still under development. APIs could also be unavailable due to the context like a restricted testing environment. It is also a fast and easy way to test your application with the APIs you are integrating without the hassles. We will move to the next question. What is the difference between web services and APIs? So, all web services are APIs, but all APIs are not web services. Web services supports XML, but API responses are formatted using Web API's media type formatter into XML, JSON or any other given format. You need a SOAP protocol to send or receive and data over the network. Therefore, it does not have lightweight architecture. Web service has no lightweight architecture, but API has a lightweight architecture. Web services can be used by any client who understands XML. APIs can be used by a client who understands JSON or XML. Web service uses three styles: REST, SOAP and XML RPC for communication. API can be used for any style of communication. Web service provides supports only for the HTTP protocol. APIs provide supports for the HTTPS protocols, URL request or response headers, etc. We will move to the next question. Does the API tester need to have coding knowledge to perform API testing? API testing covers manual and automated testing. Manual testing does not require a tester to know to code. We just need API request details like headers, payload, credentials, and we should know how to use the tool like Postman or advanced REST client to test an API or to test the API functionality. But in case of automation testing, a tester needs to know how to code, how to automate test cases. So, the automation tester needs to have a knowledge on REST Assure or Java to do the API automation. But to perform the manual API testing, the functional API testing, you do not need to know coding knowledge. You can do it using the manual tools like Postman and advanced REST client. That is all for today. I hope this video is helpful for you. If you like this video, please press the like button, share it with your friends, and if you have not yet subscribed, please do subscribe. Thank you. Bye bye.